Stephanie, what was in this note from Sam Altman last night?
Yeah. So in this memo that we were able to write about, essentially Sam declared what he calls a code red. So he told employees that he wants them to prioritize improving ChatGPT as OpenAI faces more competition from rivals like Google. So what that kind of consists of are things like improving model behavior, personalization, image generation, speed, reliability. And to do all those things, he did admit that the company will have to deprioritize some other work streams. So this includes advertisements and AI agents. And I think what really stood out here is that this is actually one of the first times that the company has even acknowledged wanting to do ads in ChatGPT, which has been quite a controversial topic. And then, of course, to kind of put all this in context, this all comes weeks after we've seen new models from competitors like Google and Anthropic that have actually outperformed OpenAI's models in certain areas.
Right. Now, it's the first time that they've acknowledged the ads effort, but it's not the first time, at least in recent weeks, that we've heard from OpenAI executives about the threats that these companies face and the fact that the company might be slowing down in some ways, right?
Yeah. So, and another story that my colleague Aaron and I wrote about, I think last week, we did write that, like you said, this isn't the first time Sam Altman has kind of acknowledged the rising competition in the AI industry. Last month, in the kind of weeks leading up to Google releasing Gemini 3, he also released a memo within the company kind of acknowledging like, hey, there's this really good new model coming out from Google soon, but we believe that we're making bets that are going to help us win in the long run. So
right. He said that the vibes were going to be rough, right? I mean, that's what he said.
Yeah, I think
Steph, and by the way, Steph, great stories, great scoops, kept me up late reading last night. But what a shift, right? I mean, when that first memo came out, the memo was stay the course, troops. We have so many hard things to do, but stay focused. And now code red. And I think, what's fascinating to me is, I mean, yes, the competition is intensifying, but there seems to be this sort of like messianic quest for one-upping each other on models and product, which I actually think is more important. But this idea, we're caught into this race that OpenAI and others are kind of pulling us into, when it also seems to me that all the models are getting better and they're all going to get really good. And maybe we should be focused more on how people are using these products and the engagement behavior. So I was really struck by that and just a broader theme I've been thinking about. For this whole 2025, we've been talking about the AI war, and OpenAI and Altman have kind of been the ones stoking it. And then you kind of Gemini rolling out with some cool features and products. They kind of haven't been sucked in the same way, and they're getting inroads with consumers. So I kind of wonder, and Steph, your thoughts, like, is this war mentality really, like, why do you think so many leaders are turning to that in AI in this moment?
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think?
As you mentioned, it is very much like this kind of back and forth where, every couple of weeks you see a lab release a new model. Then the next week, another lab releases a model that they say is slightly better. So it does kind of feel like we're stuck in this like loop of just slightly improving models versus, as you're kind of saying, thinking about the actual products that are being built on them and whether those are actually useful and people are, using those products. I think in some ways, yesterday's memo that Sam put out is actually a bit more of a focus on product, because he does mention, we have new models that we're working on. They're going to be really good, which, one of them is one that we wrote about this morning. But specifically, the memo is also super focused on ChatGPT and improving that, which is obviously kind of OpenAI's main money-making product. So I think like these two memos kind of show this tension that you're talking about, where on one hand, you have this constant race to release new models. On the other hand, you can't forget about products like ChatGPT and making sure that that growth is still happening and people are still, using those sorts of products. So that's where they make a lot of their money from, obviously.
Right. I mean, Jessica, that's what I wanted to get your take on was, ChatGPT and OpenAI has really spread itself in every direction. We've written extensively about this suite of products that it has been exploring with browsers, with agents. It's got the social media feed. I mean, do you think that the company at all stressed itself too thin? And how does it balance the product thing with what Steph's saying, which is that the underlying model has to be competitive?
Kosh, this is the number one question I get from investors, current investors in OpenAI, and people who haven't invested in OpenAI. And they look at the company. They actually don't ask me how it's going to keep raising money, which I think maybe they should ask me. But it's this question. I was sitting with a well-known investor yesterday in our office talking about this very topic. Look, on one hand, it's a model as old as time with tech companies. You plant 1 million seeds, some flowers bloom. Google has spread itself thin again and again in its history.
Right.
So, and we've talked on this podcast and the information about that's the playbook that they're using. At the same time, these aren't normal times. And I think there is a big question over what is the killer product in AI. Is it the standalone chatbot assistant and cramming more into it? Is it a more embedded, distributed intelligence across all the consumer surfaces where we already have very dominant players like email, like social, like business apps? So I think that is existential for OpenAI too. I tend to think focus is good, but I also understand to recruit people, you need a lot of flowers to bloom and learn. So I think it depends. And but clearly Altman's trying to rally the troops. I mean, I just think these rallying cries, this war language has really been designed.
Is it rare? Is this common? Is this language code red?
Common. I mean, you could go back in the history of Silicon Valley and see many posters with such slogans. But again, the framework I keep coming back to as I look to next year in this AI battle is, I think this war framework, which everyone's been sucked into, the press has been sucked into, everyone has been sucked into, has been designed to raise capital and attract talent. It isn't necessarily what is going to win on the product side. And, I was talking to someone recently who spends a lot of time in China, and I was saying, what's the state of play in AI? And I'm also skeptical that this China versus US in AI makes any sense because we're both going to win. And both countries are going to have cutting edge AI. And yes, we should innovate. And yes, we should be as far as we can in the US. But the idea that that's not going to happen doesn't make sense to me. But this investor said, look, in China, they focus on building products. You don't hear DeepSeek and Alibaba and Tencent and ByteDance talking about one-upping each other in the AI war. They're very, very focused on how people are using AI. And last thing I'll say, and Steph, I think one of the most interesting things in your memo, yes, deprioritizing ads. I mean, what an idea. Deprioritize the revenue stream. Investors may have some questions about that, or a revenue stream, obviously not the only one. But agents. And I think, when I also look back on this year, you can tell I've been doing that. Where are we in agents? We're seeing multiple data points of lowering expectations around agents. And now I'm not in the weeds the way Steph is to know, agents are one front in business adoption of AI. They're not the whole story, but they were certainly the story that companies, everyone, down the line from OpenAI to Salesforce on and on have been pushing. And I think that's another thing to watch. We saw the Thrive and OpenAI AI announcement earlier this week, a day ago, about a partnership with Thrive's holding company, designed to accelerate maybe business adoption and agents too. But here we have Altman actively calling it out as not a priority. So I think that's something to watch as well.
Right. Well, it was a big story, and Steph, I know you were late last night, and you're on the road. You actually you seem to get some of your biggest stories on the road, I think. So, I mean, look, we like having you here, but stay on the road because the stories get bigger and better every time. Thank you, Steph, for coming on. Thank you, Jessica, for joining us. We really appreciate it. We will see you both very soon.